What a difference 24 hours makes. We sat here a day ago and talked about Jim Harbaugh and the seemingly imminent departure from Michigan. But a funny thing happened on the way to Minneapolis. That is today's big story. And as you have certainly heard by now, after a month of silence and uncertainty, the huge news broke last night. Jim Harbaugh is indeed staying at Michigan, the school confirming the numerous reports that started circulating early last evening. The news broke on this same day. The Wolverines coach was in Minnesota to meet with the Vikings. Harbaugh, of course, led Michigan to the college football playoff this past season. Media reports indicating Harbaugh was never offered the Vikings job. Gets us to today's big interview, and he is John U. Bacon, multiple-time New York Times best-selling author. You see his latest work over his left shoulder. Let them lead. We'll get to that in just a bit. Well placed, John. Well placed. We'll get to that in a bit. But let's start with Jim Harbaugh. And you have known him for a long time. If I recall correctly, middle school hockey teammates. Is that right? Is that when you first met Jim?
That is correct, Dave. And one of us was a great athlete, but I won't tell you who.
I would take a guess. I mean, it's a coin flip. But most people, yes, most people are wondering. I wonder who it was. How surprised are you that Jim Harbaugh is still the Michigan coach?
Surprised, but not as surprised as others. As I tweeted yesterday morning, all those who are saying it's a done deal were not aware of the dynamics going into it. And for the record, I was on the record at 8 o'clock yesterday morning before it all broke. I still thought it was going to happen. I can't lie about that, about 80%. But I thought there was a margin there and the interview was going to matter. And what I've learned since then is that sometime in the afternoon, both sides realized this is not going to be a fit. So it was the interview, and it did break that way, and Jim Harbaugh was not offered the job.
You did have quite a quote tweet thread, I guess I should say, yesterday that I saw before we went on the air that cast some doubt as to whether or not this would happen and went into some factors that might prevent it from happening. So give people I would encourage people who want to kind of know that backstory, certainly John U. Bacon on Twitter, but just give people a sense of why this was not the slam dunk maybe that others were seeing it as.
Sure, I'd say a few reasons. One, Jed York, the owner, of course, of the 49ers, where Jim Harbaugh had been the coach 2011 to 2014. They ended on pretty bad terms, and Jed York was not bashful about telling other owners that he was difficult to deal with. Now, how much that was true versus Jed York's spin on it, I mean, only people inside the organization can say for sure. But that was going on around the league for many years during all these various rumors. So that's one guy you have working against you. And of course, he knows the Wilf family who owns the Vikings. Second one is Jim Stapleton, a proud Michigan graduate who had been a trustee at Eastern Michigan University. He's also a minority owner of the Vikings, about 5-10%, I think, who helped put that deal together in 2005 financially. He has been adamant, by all accounts, against Harbaugh's candidacy at the Vikings, and let that be known to the Wilf family and anybody who would listen there as well. So those are, as an internal and external foe, if you will, of your candidacy, that can't help. So right there, you've got people in your ear against you. Then, of course, Quessy, the general manager, was the most interested in Harbaugh. But how interested he was and whether or not he could persuade the family were all open questions as of this time yesterday. So, and we all know, Dave, and you know this better than I do, billionaire owners can do whatever they like. This is their Xbox. So they proved it.
You know, I think I just fell into the trap here, John, of thinking that no one would put themselves in this spot if they didn't know they were getting the job. And I think that's the part that is most curious to me, is kind of how Jim Harbaugh allowed this to happen to him. And I keep coming back to this notion, and you and I were texting about it a little bit this morning, that Jim Harbaugh does not have an agent. And I think people think about agents as, well, they line their clients' pockets. It's all about what they negotiate for them, the money they make for them. But agents, when they're good, are also advisors. And I guess there's a part of me that's wondering whether somehow along the way, Jim Harbaugh just wasn't getting the advice that he needed to get, because very publicly now, he has been rejected from this job and really from numerous NFL jobs, because he obviously pursued several others as well.
I think that's not inaccurate. Furthermore, I had it on good authority, and others did as well, that if he was offered the job, he would have taken it. I was 99% sure of that. as sure as one can be these days. His lawyer from the 2014 negotiations with Michigan is a guy named John Denniston, a proud Michigan graduate also, who made his money in Silicon Valley, works for free pro bono for Jim. So Jim does not have a conventional agent in that sense. He does have advisors, most especially his father, Jack Harbaugh, and his brother, John Harbaugh. But you're right. An agent often handles kind of traffic for you, so you can keep your own fingers out of the pie and off the, and I'm mixing metaphors now, out of the pie and off the radar. You do the math on that one there, Dave. But yes, the agents tend to work furtively and beneath the behind the scenes to avoid any public impression like this. All that said, however, Jim Harbaugh is wired differently than most, and he's never been afraid to bet on himself, publicly or otherwise. PR be damned, and this is one of those cases.
Yeah, and again, I'm not sitting here trying to line the pockets of Neil Cornrich. Not that they need further lining. I guess it's interesting to me. It's interesting to me that
it's a different case. It's one you probably will not see with any other coach you deal with.
Right, because we haven't seen anything like this. We've never seen such a long public uncertainty surrounding such a high-profile coach. I mean, this dragged on for more than a month, really. So now let's get past what did happen and get into what happens next here. So what's the mood at Michigan today?
More upbeat than I would have expected, and this is on a few different layers, of course. Talking about players, staffers, and fans. The same fans who wanted him fired a year ago were outraged that he's looking at Vikings yesterday and seemed thrilled that he's back. And that's probably about an 80-20 ratio. Not scientific, obviously. But in that sense, that reception has been more positive than I might have expected, given the long flirtation, as you pointed out. The staff, was a bit in limbo, undeniably, for a month during this process. You don't know who your boss is going to be and therefore what your job is going to be. But this is probably the simplest outcome for Michigan they could have hoped for in terms of, okay, you got a bump in the road, some fences to mend perhaps, but a coaching search had no obvious successors. So that being the case, it would have been another long drawn-out process, and the players and their coaches would have even less certainty as to what was going to happen next. So this is the simplest outcome for Michigan, no question.
Where do you think he needs to do the most healing? Is it with the fan base? Is it with the assistant coaches? Is it with the administration, the players, the parents? What's kind of the spot where he maybe has done the most damage?
I would say yes to that one. I don't think any of it's, I'm not hearing of any, great rupture. I'm not hearing, this camp or that camp is fed up and he can't reach him. I'm hearing, 80-20 kind of stuff. Okay. And within range of, if I sit down and talk to them, if I'm Jim Harbaugh, in the players meeting, the staff meeting, perhaps individual meetings as needed, he should be fine. Ward Manuel is one of those relationships that he needs to probably bolster, and perhaps on both sides with Ward Manuel as well. If you flirt with somebody else and you come back, you probably need to go to a marriage counselor for a little bit to make sure that we are stable. So that is going to happen probably with a long-term contract, and Jim's comment last night that he wanted Ward to know that he was not going to be doing this every year, that he's at Michigan to stay. And I will say this, Jim's a different kind of character, no question about it, but he's not a liar. And his word tends to be rock solid. So that is probably the case. Right,
and that's one thing that struck me. I think a big part of the reason he didn't say anything was because he didn't want to tell an untruth, right? It would have been easy to say, well, no, I'm not doing this. But Angelique had the great quote from one of the recruits' fathers saying, no, he was very upfront that this is interesting to him and that if an opportunity comes up, that he may take it. And so that does speak again to his character and the kind of person he is, that in a world where we see people publicly deny things that are the truth, he did not go down that road. And so again, I think you take it face value when he says, I'm not going to do this again. As he said, the potential, the New Deal has been talked about. My understanding is from a lot of reporting, it's essentially on the table, right? So what's your understanding about kind of where this might go and how quickly we might hear from Jim Harbaugh in Michigan in terms of a new contract agreement?
I think that's one place where he mends those fences, is that this contract's going to be done. It already basically is done, as you pointed out. It'll be public in probably a day or two. And when that gets public, then you say all the right things and you're in a much better place. But back to your point from the great Angelique Shingalis, good friend of both of ours, of course, at the Detroit News. The saving grace, okay, if you went public with this search and now you have a bit of egg on your face based on that, the saving grace is you can come back to those same recruits and say, I was up front. I wasn't, bidding for this job. I didn't get it, but I never lied to you. And now I'm telling you I'm here for the long haul and your career. So you have a credibility that often coaches do not have in these situations. So for the price of a bit of public embarrassment, you get probably a long-standing relationship with those people.
One of the things I've thought about as this has gone down here in the last 24 hours is kind of how he needs to frame it. And it seems to me part of the challenge here is that the Vikings job was clearly wrong for him, whether it was wrong for him from his point of view, from the Vikings' point of view, or some combination of both. But there were several NFL jobs out there. And so there still seems to be this belief somewhere that the NFL is right, that he wants to go and lift that Lombardi trophy. So how much does he have to say? And as you said, he's telling Ward Manuel, I'm not going to go out and look for other jobs every single year. But somewhere in the back of his mind, there's got to be something that's still pulling at him. So how do you think, what's the best way to frame it? How would you advise him to frame it? I'm not suggesting that you're in that position, but
I'm not.
Yeah.
Look behind me, Dave. You're an advisor. No, that's a very, very interesting angle on that one, of course. I'd say a few things. One, when he got to Michigan, he told the interim AD, Jim Hackett, that he promised him at least 7 years, but did say to Hackett that he's got unfinished business, quote unquote, in the NFL. So this is not that surprising that he took a look. Of course, his brother John has already won a Super Bowl at his expense in the NFL. So now the question is really boils down to, I think, Dave, he's got to make up his mind. Whatever your decision is, you need to say it. Are you at Michigan for the rest of your career, or could it still happen in 5 years from now, perhaps? Whatever that is, say I'm committed to 5 years, or I'm committed for the rest of my career. Whatever it is, say it. But first, you have to know it. That's one thing. Beyond that, of course, it's not, I don't think, unfair for Jim to look around, especially when he told his first boss this is probably going to happen at some point. But then you can say, look, I was always intrigued by it. I took a look. I'm no longer interested, and that's where I stand. So as your coach, I'm in a better spot now than I was a year ago, that I've taken a look. I'm not, that's not my thing. I'm here for the long haul. It could be a better step forward than what he had the previous 6 years.
Angelique and I were speaking yesterday about the fact that this job has changed, not just in Michigan, but it's changed everywhere in the world of college football. That this is a very different world, even than it was 2 or 3 years ago, John, with NIL, with the transfer portal. It is much more of a 24-hour-a-day, 365-day-a-year job, much more so than the NFL. And I know there is no one out there who is taking out the violins for these coaches. I mean, they are incredibly well paid, and I get that. I'm not in any way trying to engender sympathy for them. I'm simply saying that it's a different job than a lot of these guys signed up for, and many of them have kind of articulated it either publicly or privately here over the last few years. How much do you believe that may have been a factor for Jim in terms of thinking, well, this job is a little different. I did a great job here. I did what I set out to do. We beat Ohio State. We won the Big Ten. We made the college football playoff, did a lot of really great things. And this job is different. And so maybe I go back to this unfinished business, as you put it.
I think that was a close number 2 on the list of reasons. I think number 1 was his lifelong curiosity with the NFL, which was only whetted, of course, by his first 4 years with the 49ers. But number 2 was the landscape has changed. And look, I'll be direct here. The Big Ten, frankly, operates at a higher level, I think, than much of the rest of the country. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And the uneven playing field can be frustrating, as well as this, anybody tells you they know what's going to happen with NIL is lying to you. It's Wild West right now. No one really knows how it's all going to shake out, what the unintended consequences are going to be. I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm saying it's very hard to chart. So if your point is very well taken, Dave, that if I'm an equally good college and NFL coach, and Harbaugh might be one of the few who is, the NFL, ironically, is probably easier than the college ranks. You're not recruiting. You're not worried about grades. You're not worried about NIL. The NIL is called a contract, and we're done with that. I think that in many ways, the NFL is a simpler lifestyle, ask his brother, than college is right now. So that is a factor.
Look, he had a great year at Michigan. I think it exceeded everyone's expectations. It didn't go great in the college football playoff, of course, but beating Ohio State is enormous. Winning the Big Ten is enormous. All of these albatrosses that were hanging over this program are gone now. So what's next for Michigan? How can Jim Harbaugh take a step forward, particularly given what you said, that it was pretty obvious in that game in the college football playoff, the gulf between Michigan and Georgia?
Yeah, I think Michigan had 3 or 4 5-star players in the field, and they had 20, which is kind of all of them. So that's a big gap right there. So that's very hard to, even a number 9 or 10 recruiting class, which they have right now, Michigan does, is not going to cover that gap, obviously. So that's a factor there. No question about it. What he does to go forward, I would say, it sounds maybe silly and simplistic, beat Michigan State. That has been, speaking of albatrosses, they're 3-4 against Michigan State during Harbaugh's tenure. 2 or 3 of those games, the punt game and so on, are just crazy, wild finishes, maybe. But there you are. And last year was a bit of that as well. So that would probably go more to shore up the fan base than almost anything else. I'd say another 10-win season. That's a list of demands, naturally. And in the Ohio State game, playing to the Horseshoe has not been easy for Michigan. They've not won there in 20-some years. But to be competitive throughout, they've had a blowouts, heck, a lot of blowouts this century, about half of them, I think. So that would go a long way as well. But I think actually going back, this might be his Bo/Texas A&M moment. Now, Bo turned down Texas A&M and a pay raise of quadrupling your pay, different circumstances in many ways. But the palpable relief I'm getting from Michigan fans is more than I expected after this long flirtation. So it's up to Jim at this point, but it is eminently doable.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating case. I don't think there's any question about it because there is a lot of good feeling around Michigan football, and deservedly so right now. Again, he did a phenomenal job this year. And so, to your point, if this just becomes a bump in the road, I do think we have this tendency to live in the moment so much. And, you know, all of my questions have frankly been in the moment about the next 3 days or the next week or whatever, just because I think that's natural. It's the news today. But if we're 7-8 months from now, and he's, you know, having a year from now, and he's had another good year, and none of this stuff comes up, and maybe he beat Ohio State, maybe he didn't, but maybe he beat Michigan State instead, and they were competitive and they were really good. I don't think anyone's talking about this stuff, but it's certainly a big story right now. I do want to leave you with this. I mentioned the book off the top. We're going to have you on at some point here to discuss it in greater detail, but give people just the quick pitch of Let Them Lead.
Sure, Let Them Lead. Unexpected lessons in leadership from America's worst high school hockey team. Not making that up. 0-22-3, ranked dead last in the nation. They hire yours truly, Dave, to coach them. I happen to be the worst player in the history of Ann Arbor Huron High School. Most games in Huron uniform, 86, with the fewest goals, 0. Can't break that. Even Harbaugh can't break that. So, worst team in America, worst player in school history. How does this work? And it did work, and the lessons are therein. But one of the biggest ones, and the best coaches in the Big Ten and all sports do this, if you want to make it special, the easiest way to make it special is to make it hard. You raise the bar, you don't lower it, and then once they're ready, you hand them the keys to the car, not you. From John Cooper, great line. Bad teams, nobody leads. Good teams, coaches lead. And great teams, everybody leads. And I don't care if they're millennials or Generation Z, and I had them all. It works. And that's the lesson of the book.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, John, as I said, we'll have you back on to discuss it in greater detail. Glad to hear it's going well, and always appreciate your insights on a topic on which you are one of the foremost experts out there. No one has done more great work on Michigan than you. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Scheduling news this time on the women's side, impacting a couple games that were scheduled for tonight. Battle between Illinois and number 6 Michigan has been postponed. They will work to reschedule it. Meanwhile, Northwestern Purdue moved from tonight to tomorrow night at Mackey Arena. Doubleheader of men's hoops on Saturday. Northwestern heading to Lincoln for a matchup with Nebraska. Stephen Bardo and I will be in Madison as Johnny Davis and 11th ranked Wisconsin look to bounce back as they host Penn State. It's Big Ten basketball Saturday on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Well, we have talked a lot about how good the big men are in the Big Ten, Rafael, and we saw 2 of them last night. We actually probably technically saw 3 of them last night, but in Kofi Cockburn and Zach Edey, kind of more traditional bigs where you think about them dumping the ball inside to the big men. And having him operate in the low post. I know there's a different kind of big, though, that you want to highlight. Explain your concept here.
I mean, bigs that can go and get their own basket. A guy maybe you can throw it to in the high post, the mid post, that you can trust that can go and score their own basket, go and score a basket facing up to the rim. You think of guys like Travion Williams, E.J. Liddell, Pete Nance. You think of guys like that can face you up, get to the basket. You start with Travion Williams. Travion Williams is a guard in the big man's body. He can really score the basketball from the wing. He can take one or two dribbles with the crossover and then end up in the post-up, right or left hook. He has a really smooth offensive game to where he can go around bigs and go get a finish. You think of E.J. Liddell being one of the worst matchup problems in the country at 6'7". He plays like he's 6'9", 6'10", shooting 40% from three, so he can stretch off the defense as well. What do you do on a pick and pop? Does he roll? Does he pop? He can make shots. He can get in the lane and shoot a little fadeaway jump shot, but he can also play the five. And you get E.J. Liddell against, say, a Zach Edey on the perimeter, he can go around him every single time. He has that type of ball skill to where he has good footwork, he can finish at the basket, finish in mid-range, and shoot the three.
Let's dive a little deeper into Travion Williams. I think one of the things that really fascinates me about him is the passing ability. Like, you look at assist rate, right, which is the percentage of field goals while you're on the floor that you assist. He's 40th in the nation in that. He is the only player in the top 90 who's taller than 6'7".
Dang.
So you think about how he's just different, right?
Yeah.
And so how does it change defending him because of this skill set you talked about, because of his ability to handle, because of his ability to pass?
It makes it so hard. You almost can't double team him. He's a guy that wants a double. He accepts the double because he has so much confidence in his passing ability. If you post trap him, he has an ability to throw missiles right behind his head to Caleb First, Mason Gillis to get layups. If you trap him with the wing, he has one of the best abilities, cross-court laser passes to an open shooter. And he doesn't just make passes. He hits you right on the money in your shot pocket, which makes it almost impossible to think about leaving your man when you know he's going to deliver it on target, on the money every single time.
You mentioned E.J. Liddell as well. I want to dive a little further into him. And it seems to me one of his great assets, because he has this skill set, because he's such a difficult matchup, is his ability to get to the free throw line, right? So how does being this type of player, this, I don't want to use the word unique because we're going through four of them, but this unusual type of big man, how does that help you in kind of those aspects of the game?
It opens the floor up. You can't really sag off of him and help in the paint on Zach Key or Kyle Young. You have to press up on him, and then he puts your big man in foul trouble every single game. You know he's going to get to the free throw line. He's going to do his part on the physicality level. So it definitely puts pressure on your second line defense. You can't put a guard on him, because you understand he's going to take you right into the post. He's a big man that can play on the wing, but he's not afraid to go on the block. He'll take smaller defenders down there. So switching four ways is tough against an Ohio State team. Purdue had some success with it, but you saw in that second half, he really got going. It's a guy who hit 3 big-time threes in Mackey Arena to tie the game up, to force Jay Knivey to hit that shot. So he's definitely a matchup problem, and when he's determined to get to the line, I mean, he can do it with the best of them. We saw him also hit 4 or 5 threes in 4 minutes against Northwestern. He can score in a lot of different ways, but getting to the free throw line definitely helps him get going. And then it also gets the other team in the bonus quicker, and you may see a Malachi Brennan shoot 14 free throws because off of one-and-ones in situations like that.
He's 17th in the nation in fouls drawn per 40 minutes. You think about how many players there are out there, right, with 350-plus teams. It shows you what a skill set he is there. Trayce Jackson-Davis is, I mean, you go through the Big Ten statistical, go through the numbers here, and he's top 12 in scoring and rebounding and field goal percentage and blocks. He's such a versatile player. What makes him such a tough matchup?
His athleticism. He's so athletic, so explosive. If he gets to that left hand driving downhill, you just got to get out of the way at times. There's not a lot of guys, not a lot of bigs in the country that can stay with him when he has a full head of steam. He's starting to rebound at a higher, well, he's been rebounding at a higher level, but he's starting to handle it a little more when he gets a defensive rebound, having that ability to maybe not push it coast to coast, but he's pushing it up the floor a little bit, putting stress on the defense. And like I said, when he gets to that left hand going downhill, or he gets to the right hand with the spin back to the left, he's very effective. So he can stretch out the defense in a way you're not necessarily worried about him shooting a jump shot. You're just worried about him getting a full head of steam and those guys playing off of him.
I know you wanted to mention Pete Nance as well. You'd mentioned him earlier. What makes Pete Nance such a difficult matchup for people?
Yeah, Pete Nance could be the most skilled big man in the conference. I mean, at times he could be on the wing, playing the 3, play the 4. He's extremely fluid in his offense ability. He can shoot the 3 over 43% from 3. He can get you with the post up, being 6'10", 225. But then also he has a really good mid-range game. So if he catches it in the post, he can just turn around and just shoot right over you. He doesn't necessarily need a dribble to back you down or need the dribble to get him in rhythm. He could catch on the block or mid-range, just turn and just score over you. So he's also another matchup problem. Do you guard him with the guard? Do you guard him with the big? He really understands the offensive flow of games. I would like him to be more aggressive and get to the free throw line at a higher rate with that skill set, but it's also so fluent that you don't necessarily want to take anything away from it.
He's also a fabulous passer.
Yes,
When I had their game the other night, he threw a behind-the-back pass that was absolutely perfect. Yep. He had a bunch of turnovers in that game too, but man, as you said, I mean, really, really good skill set, but averages nearly 3 assists per game, shoots the 3 at well over 40%, so he is very difficult to guard. Pretty interesting to see like kind of how all these different guys, and I think it's unusual. I think you would agree too, to have, first of all, to have this many good big guys in the league, and I think we've seen this the last few years in the Big Ten. It has become a big man's conference in a game that, in my opinion, is a guard's game. I think college basketball is a guard's game. But also to have these different varieties of big men, right? To have your Kofi Cockburn and your Zach Edey, which I think, for me growing up anyway, that's what I thought of as a big man in the Big Ten. Why do you think the game has changed so much and that we see these players who are 6'10", 6'11", but have the skill set that I would conventionally think of from a guard or a wing?
Yeah, the game has completely changed. It's went smaller a little bit. I mean, now you have 7-footers. I mean, Pete Nance is making threes. You have guys stepping out because the NBA has changed. They're playing more small ball. Kevin Durant's a 7-footer. He's a guard. So you have guys wanting to get to the NBA, so they're modeling their game after what the NBA is attracting right now. Steph Curry kind of changed the game. Draymond Green was a small forward, power forward in the Big Ten. He's a center in the NBA at times. So I think just the way the game has shifted has caused that. Because, I mean, I played with 2 dominant 7-footers in college as well. But I think the way it's shifting, with it going smaller, it's starting to change. It's starting to become a lot faster in that sense. And every coach wants space on the floor. When you can have space, it gives guys ability to maneuver and play off of closeouts, get to the basket. It just opens the court up. But then also in transition, it allows you to be more fluid in transition on offense and defense.
And the 3 has just become so much more a part of the NBA game than it was, right? It is crazy to look at some of these more conventional 7-footers and say, man, that guy was born 20 years too late.
Yes.
Right?
Zach Edey.
Yeah. I mean, is there a place for him in the NBA? I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. But yes, I mean, he would have been, well, he'd be gone probably already, right? Yes. It would have been 20 years ago. It's fun to be able to watch him here in the college game.